Welcome to this episode of the Mayoral Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Matt Mayer. In this episode, I'm talking about Joe Biden's personal loans to his brother, Jim Biden, election fraud in a mayoral primary in the state of Connecticut, more BS from Pfizer about their vaccine, and the threat of AI to humanity. Before I get into today's content, though, please make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and share with friends and family if you like the content you see here today. Now, first topic for the day is, as I was saying, the loans that Joe Biden gave to his brother Jim Biden and how these are now coming back to haunt the Biden family and the Biden crime family. So this post was from November 3rd. It's from the GOP Oversight Committee, and it's talking about how the White House today made it clear that President Biden is refusing to hand over loan documents for any loans he provided his brother James Biden. So I will show in a minute a clip from James Comer. He's part of the House Oversight Committee, and he's going to draw a map from the Chinese Communist Party, a company affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party that gave money to the Biden family. That money filtered from Hunter to Jim Biden and his wife Sarah, from Sarah Biden, then to Joe Biden himself. Now, I've seen people post on Twitter that are in defense of Joe Biden, that this proves nothing. It proves nothing. Well, when you do the math, you will see that this is exactly what the loan payment that went to, or the money that went to Hunter Biden is $400,000. And the money that ends up in Joe Biden's pocket is $40,000. And if you remember from right before the 2020 election, a business associate of Hunter Biden, Tony Bobulinski, talking about a email communication in which it said 10% held by H for the big guy. So in that email, he explains, and again, this is 3 years ago now, him talking about H being Hunter and the big guy being Joe, that he was getting 10%. Now, that email alone proves that there is something going on there, but again, using code things like H and the big guy, those aren't too hard to crack. But this is now an example of what Bobulinski was saying, is that they would get 10% of the money that went to Hunter would then funnel through back to Joe Biden. This is kind of the way that they handled it. So I think, again, one of the things that I see people talking about is like, this is no evidence. There's no evidence at all. Well, if this was Trump, just to my liberal friends out there, if this was Donald Trump, and that money was coming from Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and there was a email out there saying 10% held by Jay for the big guy, and then you see a chain of transactions where 10% is held or eventually ends up in the back pocket of Donald Trump, you'd probably ask some questions, and rightfully so. Now, Biden, in this post from the Oversight Committee, is not cooperating with providing these loan documents. I would think at a bare minimum, liberals would want to see the loan documentation of Donald Trump lending money to his brother and then his brother repaying that loan. Now, you could write anything you want in a check memo. That doesn't make it correct, actually. But people are going to believe it anyway. Despite the evidence of this 10% coming, you could see the chains. It's been less than a month from the initial payment from this company through the Biden family into Joe's back pocket, and it took less than a month. I would have some questions if I were Democrats, and as a conservative, I would have questions of Donald Trump. If you had that type of chain giving money directly to Donald Trump, I would at least expect them to have some type of documentation of the loan. You are a public figure. Don't give me this, it was a handshake agreement between brothers. You are a public figure. You have to know that your private life is going to come into scrutiny at any point. You would think that this type of person would be very diligent about making sure that they documented this properly. Like, yes, this was a personal loan. I drew up the documentation. Here's the $40,000 going to my brother, and here's his repayment, a year later, 2 years later, whatever the terms of the repayment were. Then you could say, okay, they had the proper documentation, but there was no documentation, or at least he's not providing any documentation. This could help clear him up, but he's not doing so. And you would think that he would want to do so if he was innocent. So Here's the post from Rep. James Comer. This is him explaining it, and I'll cut it up here a little bit, but it's talking about the money laundering from the Chinese company all the way to the back pocket of Joe Biden. So I'll let Comer explain it here in this video.
Remember when Joe Biden told the American people that his son didn't make any money in China?
My son has not made money in terms of this thing about, what are you talking about, China?
Well, not only did he lie about his son Hunter making money in China, but it also turns out that $40,000 in laundered China money landed in Joe Biden's bank account in the form of a personal check. And the Oversight Committee has it. Here's how Joe Biden benefited from his family's shady deal with CEFC, a Chinese Communist Party-linked company. It all began with a shakedown in the summer of 2017 when Hunter Biden sent a message to his CEFC associate demanding a $10 million capital payment. As Hunter Biden extorted this associate, Hunter claimed he was sitting with his father and that the Biden network would turn on his associate. Days later, $5 million flowed in from a Chinese affiliate of CEFC. Over the following 3 weeks, Biden family members made a series of complicated financial transactions to hide the source of the China money. Here's how that happened. First, Northern International Capital, a Chinese company associated with CEFC, wired $5 million to Hudson West 3, a joint venture established by Hunter Biden and a CEFC associate. Then Hudson West 3 sent $400,000 to an entity owned and controlled by Hunter Biden. Next, Hunter Biden wired $150,000 to Lion Hall Group, a company owned by James and Sarah Biden. Sarah Biden then withdrew $50,000 in cash from Lion Hall Group. Later the same day, she deposited it into her and James Biden's personal checking account. A few days later, Sarah Biden cut a check to Joe Biden for $40,000. The memo line of the check said loan repayment.
So in that video, you see House Oversight Committee member James Comer talking about the direct payment from the CEFC, Chinese energy company, all the way flowing into Joe Biden's back pocket. He also mentions in that video a little bit of background of the shakedown that happened with Hunter Biden just a few weeks prior to those payments and all those transactions leading to Joe Biden himself. Him saying that I'm sitting here with my father wondering why this hasn't been taken care of. And what would you know, a couple days later, payments are made. That money makes its way all the way back to Joe Biden. Raised some serious ethical questions. However, Democrats would say no evidence at all besides eyewitness testimony, besides all the emails, text messages, bank records. All this amounts to no evidence. But if this was Donald Trump, he would be burnt at the stake for it. I opened up talking about how there was a election fraud case in the state of Connecticut that actually led to a Democrat primary being overturned because of ballots being stuffed. So you see this video here of this woman. She worked for the candidate that ultimately won the primary, and it says visiting multiple times in one day. See, just dumping a handful of ballots. Safest, most secure election in our lifetime was 2020, right? That's what they told us. This woman a couple years later, doing the same thing, the ballot stuffing that we saw all during 2020, and that led to this being overturned. Here she goes, stuffing these ballots. So the judge in the case says this, quote, "The volume of ballots so mishandled is such that it calls the result of the primary election into serious doubt and leaves the court unable to determine the legitimate result of the primary," Clark wrote in his ruling, adding that the videos, quote, "are shocking to the court and should be shocking to all parties." And it says the court overturns Gammon win in Bridgeport primary, calling evidence of fraud shocking. And this is from November 1st of 2023. Again, let's take a look here. Let's just take a gander. We saw things like this happening in the state of Georgia. Again, they said a water pipe burst in Atlanta, the deep blue part of Georgia, and poll watchers were kicked out. People question, all of a sudden, there was this huge dump overnight of very favorable dump to Joe Biden, and we're not allowed to ask questions. Not allowed to ask questions at all. Here's another video right here, or I'm sorry, a screenshot here. It says, videos claim illegal ballot dropping, but Michigan election guidance explains practices. And here's a screenshot of a couple of people just dumping off ballots into these ballot boxes back in 2020. This is Michigan. It says surveillance video shows a woman filming another woman depositing a stack of absentee ballot envelopes at a Detroit Dropbox just before the 2020 election. Again, ask yourself the question, if this happened in deep Trump country, would the narrative be the exact same? They went Russia, Russia, Russia for 4 years. Here's a video right here of CNN on live TV catching a woman doing ballot drops in Ohio.
The only ballot drop box in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. You can see this woman right here casting her vote. Did you vote for Reagan or Jimmy Carter? Carter, okay. We don't want to get too personal with people here, but you can see there's actually a traffic.
And they, of course, didn't have any questions. You see her shoving multiple ballots into that ballot box in the state of Ohio, and no questions at all. Not, hey, why are you shoving multiple ballots? I wasn't aware that people got more than one vote, but no questions to be asked. Not at all. Not by the mainstream media. Here's another example. The Wisconsin House Speaker has advanced articles of impeachment filed against state election administrator Megan Wolf. The articles cite multiple violations of election laws and maladministration during the 2020 election. In the 2020 election, Megan Wolf enabled voting in nursing homes across Wisconsin without special vote deputies as required by law. This resulted in massive fraud occurring in nursing homes, with some reporting over 100% voter turnout. I recently just lost my grandfather. He was in a nursing home the last 6 to 8 months, and he wasn't doing very well. Realistically, should not be voting and making many decisions for himself, even simple things like what to eat. These types of things were beyond his mental capability by the end of his life. And unfortunately, you see this a lot in nursing homes. So getting 100% turnout really begs the question of, should these people even be voting in the first place based on their mental capabilities? And then on top of that, you get 100% voter turnout. Guys, don't ask questions. Do not ask questions. Safest, most secure election of all time was the 2020 election. Safest, most secure. A mayoral primary in Connecticut just got overturned with evidence of fraud from mail-in balloting. That's a small state and one small area of that state for that mayoral race. And it got overturned based on that evidence. There's video evidence all over the place of people stuffing ballot boxes in 2020, and nobody in the mainstream media seems to care, because you want to know why? Because their guy won. Imagine if that was all Trump corruption. Let's just say it was. If every single one of these cases were in deep Republican areas, would they be investigating? I would think that they would. But because they happen in Democrat areas, those could have been Trump operatives. They have to know with almost 100% certainty that these are Democrat operatives doing these ballot dumps. They have to know, because these are the areas of the country that they are in. They don't care about the integrity of the election. They just care if they win. Now, Republicans are guilty of this too, but there are some serious questions about the 2020 election that need to be addressed. And until they are addressed, people are going to have questions over and over again. And the cases like what we just saw in Connecticut aren't going to make it any easier to say ballot drop boxes are safe and secure, because they clearly are not. Here's another one right here. This one I'm going to play the audio for, so I'm going to go on mute here. This one's pretty crazy, pretty shocking. And this is a video from November 2nd, 2020. So here we go.
Okay, Patty, you want to describe that?
Well, yeah, so this woman is delivering a stack of ballots, and the person behind her rolls down the window and hands her a ballot to put in the ballot box with her stack. And then she goes back to her car with the stack of ballots again, And I think at that point she realized that the ballots were not signed, and so you're going to watch her sign each ballot in the vehicle, and she signs them and then puts them on the dashboard individually. First she searches for a pen, so it takes a second, but we've got this speeded up so you can see. But yeah, so she's signing, and when it's slowed down, you can see the pen in her hand when she reaches up and puts the ballot on the dashboard each time.
That is awesome.
Yeah, so
That's
man,
it.
You guys are
Yeah.
you guys
Good
are
fun.
fantastic.
Good fun. That's
Yeah, they
fantastic.
did a great
Great
job.
fun.
They did a great job finding this, and as you can
Yes.
see, there it is right there, and they did a close-up with the camera. The footage is very clear. There she goes, right to the drop box. So mission accomplished.
Unbelievable.
Safest, most secure election in human history, the 2020 election. This woman goes up to the drop box with a stack of ballots, no questions from Democrats at all. She realizes that they weren't signed, apparently, because she goes back to the car, seems to write on every single one of them. Like they said, if they slow down the video, you can see the pen in her hand every time she puts one up on the dashboard, goes right back to the drop box, drops off, I don't know how many ballots, 5, 10, whatever, and no questions at all. Again, until this gets addressed, there's going to be questions for elections from now until the end of time. Hopefully in 2024, this mass mail-in balloting is gone from a lot of states. Who knows what kind of emergency they're going to try to drum up between now and then, but if it happens like that again, I mean, there's going to be no way that people are going to take the results of that election and say they were legitimate, because videos like that. Again, I just showed you an example in Connecticut where the Democratic primary was overturned because of ballot stuffing. If we can't accept the results, if a judge says that the results need to be called into question because of videos like that and that type of evidence, why shouldn't a presidential election be called into question because of evidence like that? And there's evidence like that all over the country. And this was all in the name of COVID and making people safe and making sure they were safe. And that led to the unconstitutional power grab by the Biden administration trying to force people to get the vaccine that didn't work, that in some cases caused much more harm than it did good for the person that got the vaccine. Now, in a few episodes prior to this, I was talking about the process and how the manufacturing of these batches was not the same from the smaller dose to the larger dose. And the larger dose was never tested before it went into people's arms. So the analogy that I use is if you were going to make cookies or cupcakes or something like that, you'd probably make a dozen or a couple dozen, and you'd try it out. And if it was the right formulation, you'd say, okay, this is the type of cookies or cupcakes that I want to make on a mass scale. Now, you wouldn't make those cupcakes and claim that this is the product that you're putting out there without then tasting the cupcakes or the cookies prior to putting those out for mass sale. Because the manufacturing process, it's not just as simple as multiplying the amount that you use on the smaller batch. There's a little bit more nuance to it. So you would try it on a larger scale and say, okay, this did not work out. We need to add a little bit more butter, a little less sugar, whatever it might be. And then you would refine that manufacturing process and say, okay, well, now we have the right formulation here. So this is talking about that exactly. They produced on a smaller scale, which makes sense because you don't want to mass produce something if it's not going to work or it's not going to be something that you can sell. They started on a smaller scale, and after having produced the vaccine on the smaller scale, they then just extrapolated that, produced it on a mass scale, didn't test it, and just put it out to the masses. And this is talking about exactly what they did with that process.
They used two processes, Pfizer, Moderna, Pfizer especially. They used two processes. The first process was the vaccines that they did the mock-ups for the clinical trials. They used a PCR to amplify and create the DNA. But when they kind of got the green light from the regulators, they said, well, we need to make billions of copies of this. So they use this circular bacterial DNA plasmid to replicate this. And in order to do that, they fed it in there and it just replicated all of these mRNA and DNA sample copies. Problem was that it left a lot of kind of junk DNA in there, contaminated the vaccine. Yeah. So we have a study now from Kevin McKernan and co-authors that was out. This was out in October. DNA fragments detected in monovalent and bivalent Pfizer and Moderna vaccines from Ontario, Canada. So the ones, process 2, those are the ones out being injected into people. So those are out there for researchers to grab these vials and start testing them. And so that's what these authors and these researchers did. They took 27 mRNA vials in Ontario, Canada, and it was taken from 12 different lots. So what they looked at, they used methods to check out how much DNA was in here. And this was their conclusion. Let's just jump right to that. It says, in conclusion, these data demonstrate the presence of billions to hundreds of billions of DNA molecules per dose in these vaccines. Using fluorimetry, all vaccines exceed the guidelines for residual DNA set by the FDA and WHO of 10 nanograms per dose by 188 to 509 fold. So
wow.
Let's
I mean, that's not 500%. That's 500 times the amount that's acceptable. I just want to take a moment.
So, again, that's exactly what I was talking about a couple of episodes ago. That's what I was setting up there. Batch 1 was the small batch. Makes sense to produce it in a small quantity. You don't want to produce 1 billion doses of this if it's not going to work. So they produce it on a smaller scale. And then when they extrapolate that out, obviously they took some shortcuts, and the end product was not what they even tested. So forget about the efficacy in the first place. The second batch 2, is not even the same product that they tested in the first place. But they went out there and claimed that this was 95, 96% effective. And then, eventually that waned all the way down to like the 50s or the 40s. People aren't buying this. The amount of people that have taken this last booster is down significantly over versus the amount of people that got the first 2 doses. So meanwhile, you have one of the biggest scams in the history of our country, biggest fraud scams, and that involved this character named Sam Bankman-Fried. So for those of you who are not familiar with what happened, this was about this time last year. A crypto exchange by the name of FTX went bankrupt, and billions of dollars of customers' funds just kind of gone overnight. And Sam Bankman-Fried was the mastermind, so to speak, behind it. And they found him guilty, and he's now facing up to 110 years in prison. The sentencing date is set for March 28th of 2024. So there's a lot of people out there in the ether that don't believe in crypto, and stories like this is why they don't believe in crypto. But to me, as somebody who believes especially in the crypto asset of Bitcoin, this is not what people think it is. People think that this was just on the surface. Now, there are people that know a little bit more about this. So if you're not one of these people, I apologize. But there's a lot of people that just hear this and say, okay, this guy was involved in crypto. Crypto's a big scam. Billions of dollars of customers' funds lost. I'm going to stay away from crypto because it's a complete scam. Now, what this guy did, what FTX was an exchange. And it allowed you to purchase, like any other exchange, like a stock exchange, an online stock exchange, like TD Ameritrade, whatever, purchase a certain number of a crypto asset for, X dollar amount, and then you could exchange that for another crypto, so on and so forth. You can then take it off the exchange, put it onto another exchange. The safest thing, the right thing to do would be to take the money off the exchange and put it in a cold storage. In either case, if you take it off the exchange, either way, Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX have to transfer that money to a wallet. So what that means is they then have to say, okay, you had 1 Bitcoin and we're claiming to have 1 Bitcoin. We're going to then we actually have to take that Bitcoin and transfer it to this exchange. Say it's Coinbase. Now Coinbase has that, and it represents in your account as having 1 Bitcoin. Now, in the case of FTX or Coinbase, if you wanted to withdraw it from the exchange, it'd be essentially like an ATM withdrawal. You take your money out of the bank. It's not just in there. Like If you have $1,000 in your bank and you withdraw $100, now you have $900, but you physically have it. And I know that this is digital, so it's a little bit hard for people to wrap their heads around. But you physically have it in this storage, and it would be on the blockchain, which is an immutable ledger. So anyone who would be able to look that up, I know it's a lot of technical stuff, but anyone who looked it up would say, okay, this one Bitcoin belongs to this address, and that address is yours. Now they might not, they wouldn't know who that is because the addresses are a string of numbers and letters, but anyone who looked at the ledger would be able to say this Bitcoin belongs in this address. Okay, it belongs in my cold storage wallet. It doesn't belong in FTX exchange. It doesn't belong in Coinbase exchange. That's where it is. Now, what FTX was doing is what banks do, but they're not FDI insured, and they got caught with their pants down when there was a run on the bank. So let's say that there was $10 billion of customers' funds that was put into FTX throughout the years, right? And that was the face value of it. Now, FTX is supposed to, but because they're not a scammer like a bank, they are supposed to keep that money on hand. They don't have the ability, they don't have the legal authority to become a bank and have a fractional reserve, right? So banks, when they say if they have $100 billion of customer assets, they also have $500 billion in which they loaned out. So if there was a run on the bank, they don't have that money that they've lent out. Now, they weren't able to do that. So what Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX was doing was treating it like a bank. So they would make certain loans, they would do different trades themselves and try to increase their assets. So the amount of money that they actually had on there, in this case, I'm using an example of, let's say, 10 billion. That's what they had. But they used that to leverage their positions elsewhere. And ultimately, it came crashing down when people made a run on it because they're claiming to have $30 billion worth of assets, but they only had $10 billion. I'm throwing numbers out there. I don't remember the exact numbers there. But that's essentially what they did. They were treating themselves as a bank. They thought that they could run off fractional reserve, but when push came to shove and people started actually withdrawing from the exchange, like I said, either transferring it to a different exchange like Coinbase where they actually had to make that transaction. It wasn't just, an IOU essentially. Or when people were pulling it off and putting it into their own cold storage, they started running out of assets pretty quickly, and that's where they got caught with their pants down. So ultimately, again, fraudster trying to use other people's funds to grow their wealth, and they got caught with it. I hope that this guy faces 110 years. I hope he is put in prison for the rest of his life to teach people out there that this is not something that's acceptable. So last week on Halloween, Joe Rogan had a frequent guest on his program, a guy by the name of Elon Musk, and one of the topics that came up was AI. Now, I haven't touched too much on AI in my program, but I think it's important to hear from somebody like Elon who really understands AI and the potential threats to humanity from AI are more so the people that program the AI than the AI itself. You remember all these science fiction movies like The Matrix and Terminator, and where the AI becomes self-aware and then they essentially try to destroy humanity. Elon's making the case that humanity is the reason AI is a threat to humanity, with saying it depends on who it is that is actually programming the AI. So here's Elon talking about it with Joe Rogan.
An environmentalist has gone too far. They've gone way too far. If you start thinking that humans are bad, then the natural conclusion is humans should die out. Now, I'm headed to an international sort of AI safety conference later tonight, leaving in about 3 hours. I'm going to meet with the British Prime Minister, a number of other people. So you have to say, how could AI go wrong? Well, if AI gets programmed by the extinctionists, its utility function will be the extinction of humanity.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, particularly if...
They won't even think it's bad, like that guy.
Right. Yeah. If you let
it's
AI...
messed up.
there's a lot of decisions that AI would make that would be very similar to eugenics.
So there you have it from Elon Musk himself talking about the threat of AI and what that means. And he's absolutely right. I don't think that, at least I can speak for myself, I didn't think of the AI threat from that lens, like something like I just talked about, like The Matrix or like Terminator, where AI is trying to extinguish humanity. AI could just go off and be its own thing, do its own thing. It's almost like us. Like, are we trying to kill monkeys, or are we trying to kill any other primate that's out there? We just kind of let them do their thing. The point is, if somebody programs it that humans need to be extinct, then their function is going to be the extinction of humanity. So that, in and of itself, is maybe the biggest reason why AI is a huge threat to humanity. It just depends on who programs it. Then you hear buffoons like this. This is Kamala Harris. She, for some reason in this video, she's actually not talking about school buses or Venn diagrams, but she's talking about AI. And this is just as scary, if not more scary, than what Elon was talking about extinctionists being the ones programming AI. Somebody like Kamala Harris and people in the Biden administration are potentially just as scary.
I believe history will show that this was the moment when we had the opportunity to lay the groundwork for the future of AI. A future where AI is used to advance human rights and human dignity, where privacy is protected and people have equal access to opportunity, where we make our democracies stronger and our world safer. A future where AI is used to advance the public interest. And that is the future President Joe Biden and I are building.
AI advancing the public interest. That should scare you. And here's why. What is public interest? Who decides what the public interest is? Joe Biden? Kamala Harris? Democrats? Have you gone to a major Democratic city recently? Have you seen the videos coming out of the city of Chicago, an extremely liberal city, where there's migrant encampments like all over the place, or they're starting to build these migrant encampments? They're kicking youth football teams out of their practice facility because they need to make room for migrants? Is that in public interest? Ask yourself that question. Are these drug encampments that you see in places like San Francisco and Portland, is that in public interest? To advance public interest? See, that's the problem with AI more than anything, is who programs it. And obviously you see somebody like Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they want to be ahead of it because they want to be the ones programming it. That's almost as dangerous as the extinctionists programming AI, is people like this programming AI. I mean, we'd be living in a living hell all over this country, not just confined to extremely liberal parts of the United States in San Francisco and Portland and in places like Chicago and New York. And the people that live there, they don't want to live there. They didn't vote for that. These people are the scary people to have control of AI. Last topic for today is going to be culture wars. It seems like I always go back to this, but this is really what the crux of the culture wars are in today's society. It's almost all about the LGBTQ, AI, whatever, and race. What's taking a lot of the forefront right now is transgender issues. So here's the CEO of Target talking about conservatives upset over trans merch, more dangerous to employees than George Floyd riots. They literally burned buildings in these cities. Burnt buildings down. Burnt them. But the conservatives being upset about having a transgender tuck-friendly bathing suit in the kids section, that's the biggest threat. So, look, my wife goes to Target And I tried to get her to go away from Target as much as possible. We've been shifting more of our purchases away from Target over the last couple of months, last 6 months, what it's been since this transgender thing has gotten out of hand at Target. And we're just going to continue to shift as much as possible. I'm trying to drill it into my wife's head that do not go to Target. I don't care how convenient it is. That it's right down the block. Go somewhere else. Make these people pay. Just make them pay. Like this guy's calling me and people like you that are watching this more dangerous to the employees than the George Floyd riots. I don't understand how me not showing up to your store is that dangerous. So in this piece, he's talking about how people were threatened, and this is a quote from him. He says, "We've seen natural disasters, the impact of COVID, some of the violence that took place after George Floyd's murder. But I will tell you, what I saw back in May is the first time I've been in this job where I had store members saying, 'It's not safe to come to work,'" the CEO claimed, adding that angry customers were engaged in, quote, "very aggressive behavior at store level, lots of threats, and destroyed products." Destroyed products. That's all there is in these liberal cities is just mass raids on your store. And that has nothing to do with George Floyd. This is 3 years later. This is just liberal policies letting people loot for less than $1,000 and just walking out. That's not a bigger threat than somebody destroying the product. Should they do it? No. But like, how is that a bigger threat? Somebody cutting up a bikini, a transgender bikini. That's a bigger threat than a mob of people rushing the store and stealing. The burning of stores, retail stores. I'm sure there was Targets that were burned in the 2020 riots. This is more dangerous. Don't fucking shop there. Fuck this guy. Don't shop there. Don't spend your money there. This guy hates you. The people that work there, they might hate you too. I don't know. Some of them do, some of them don't, but just don't spend your money there. Like, there's a big difference between cancel culture and protesting, like something like this, like Target or Anheuser-Busch over the trans controversies, is that we aren't calling for these places to not exist. I'm just saying, don't spend if this person hates your guts, why would you give them your business? It's very simple. Forget about it. Think about it from, think about a market back, when people used to go to markets all the time and buy fruits and vegetables, whatever, or like a farmer's market. Think about a farmer's market today, right? There's somebody that's selling broccoli. There's a couple people that do it, and one person hates your guts and the other person doesn't. Why would I buy it from the person that hates me? Why would I give them my money? I could buy broccoli here. Why would I go to Target where the CEO and the top level executives hate me? They hate me. I don't want to spend my money there. I'll go somewhere else where people might not hate me. They might hate me, but they don't publicly say things like this where they hate me. The people that work there, maybe they hate you, maybe they don't. But yeah, they're gonna feel it because of the antics of the top level executives when they do and say things like this. That's a big difference than you said something that I don't like, so you should lose your job, you should lose your... I'm not saying this guy should lose his job. You should lose your house. You should be ostracized from your community. I'm not calling for any of that. I'm just saying, don't spend your money with somebody that hates you. If they said the same thing to, I don't know, the MyPillow CEO or somebody like that that's a right-wing person, it's like, don't spend your money there. That's fine. Don't call for this guy to be censored, kicked off Twitter. I don't think that this guy should be kicked off Twitter or any other social media. He has the right to say what he wants. And I have the right to spend my money somewhere else. And I'm going to exercise that right. And then I noticed with the transgender issues, it's always one-sided. So here's a story of a field hockey player, of a young male pretending to be a woman, and you'll see in this video he shoots, and like this girl here, she's a teenager, gets knocked in the face, and you could see the reaction of the people there. The girls covering their face, they couldn't believe like what just happened. This always is one-sided. This is one-sided. Like, I don't see, and if there is no difference between men and women, why is it always when want to compete with women, the women get hurt. But when women want to compete with men, the men don't get hurt. So a transgender man, which is a woman who thinks that she's a man, come on, go ahead, play football with full grown men. It's not going to happen. They just don't have the physical ability to do so. But when the inverse is true, even when they're trying to make their body less strong by taking estrogen and doing things like hormone replacement therapy, they are still naturally stronger than women because of the way that they're built. It's absolutely ridiculous. And they don't seem like, these people don't seem to understand, or maybe they do. They probably just think that you're that dumb, that you won't understand that there is clearly a difference between men and women. And this only goes one way. This only goes one way. You hear about like these people that were men that are now claiming to be women. I forget the UFC fighter's name, like Farrah Fox, something like that, something Fox, I think. And he got into a ring with a woman, and this woman walked away with like facial fractures, which had never happened to her before when she fought actual women. There's a huge difference, and again, it only goes one way. I don't see Leah Thomas, who was actually William Thomas originally, now Leah Thomas, such a brave #1 ranked contender in women's NCAA swimming a couple years ago. I don't see any woman transitioning to become a man and then all of a sudden dominating sports. There's a power lifter. I forget where this person's from, Canada, something like that. It's a man masquerading as a woman, setting all these records. I would love to see a story where the inverse is true. It's not true because there clearly is a huge difference between men and women physically, and the women are the ones that get hurt. They lose out on positions because the man's clearly going to be, generally speaking, better than the women. And then on top of that, you see situations like this where because they're so much physically stronger, women are getting hurt in these types of sports. And it's unfair to women. And these people, these feminists, where are all the feminists at? That's what I want to know. They should be screaming from the rooftop. But it has to do with the victimization of this country and of this world, that there's actually more victimization of trans people. So therefore, they are going to take the side of the most victimized person, or the person they perceived, group of people they perceived to be the most victimized. And clearly, transgender women are way more victimized than just regular women. So therefore, these regular women have to be victimized by these transgender women. It makes sense. Liberal logic makes sense to them. That's it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Please make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share with friends and family if you like the content you see here today. And I will see you all in the next video.